Hello, everyone, and welcome to the W2 Amigos podcast, where we talk about passive investing, real estate, and all the money moves that you can make while working your W2 so you can establish your financial freedom. Here to talk about their W2 journey, your host and amigos, Nick Coulter and Xavier Marin. Nick, what's going on, man? How you doing today?
I'm doing excellent. I am heading out on my honeymoon tonight at midnight. I will be in Mexico, kind of like near in between Tulum and then Playa del Carmen for 9 days. So really excited about that. A little worried about the sunburn, but we'll survive if it does happen. So really, really excited to take a little bit of a break and recharge. I've been pretty much nonstop for I'd say the last 4.5 months. And when we come back, I'll close on 2 houses in like 4 days. So pretty exciting. What about you, man? What's going on with you?
That's awesome, man. Real quick, I appreciate and love how you said Tulum, like with the little accent there. Very nice. You're getting warmed up for Mexico. Love it.
Well, I have a wonderful co-host that corrected my pronunciation of his last name on our last podcast, folks. So I want to make sure I'm introducing Xavier Marin instead of Marin. I got to make sure I had to add a little bit of correct pronunciation to it. And it was funny because I told my wife, I was like, "Oh man, I've been messing up X's name." She goes, "Oh, I just thought you were doing that on purpose." I was like, "What? You noticed it too?" She's like, "Of course I did immediately." I was like, "Damn."
It only took her 7 years to not say anything. 8 years, whatever the amount is. Cool, man. Everything's been pretty good from my end. I've been pretty strapped on time recently too. So it's getting to the busy seasons right now in the Smoky Mountains. So essentially I'm averaging about like 95% occupancy between my cabins right now. So having people go in and out, a couple of things popping up here and there. But for the most part, I would say the experience has gotten kind of better over the past couple of weeks. So just between that, the W2 things going on, the commercial side going on, podcast team, like the time boxing that we've talked about and making sure you're prioritizing the right things, it's very important right now because you can easily get lost in a lot of different things going on.
Absolutely. So I know we did an amazing interview today. Who are we talking to, X? Let's share the listeners.
We are talking to one of my good pals, Jose Linares. Jose started off as, he currently working his W2, but has scaled his portfolio, has 22 units, and actually did that within 6 months in 2020 while having a family. So really great interview overall. And one of the best things that I took out of it is talking about just the mindset piece, the analysis paralysis, as well as how to be able to leverage mentorships and leveraging masterminds. So we go into that quite a bit. But that was definitely one of my favorite things about this interview. What about you, Nick?
Yeah, I would say I was really impressed with Jose's ability to walk us through, the scalability of his income and his business, basically doing them side by side. And I also thought it was really cool because we were able to hang out a little bit and chat afterward. And one of the big things that he's really proud of is being an exceptional husband and father and really trying to balance out a full-time investing career, a full-time job, being a father to 2 kids, and also being a great husband, and I think it's something that we often miss because us at the W2 and investor world, we're so driven, we're so passionate to get stuff done. Sometimes we take for granted some of the people that are supporting us. I know I do that with my wife. So Evelyn, if you're listening, I love you. I'm sorry. But we do want to make sure we highlight that was one of the coolest things I think I took away from what Jose was sharing with us.
Awesome. Well, without further ado, guys, let's get into it. I'm super excited to interview our next guest, Jose Linares. Jose is a multi-family real estate investor and full-time W2 worker. Jose, welcome to the W2 Amigos podcast. How are you doing today, man?
Thanks, Xavier. I'm really excited to be joining this podcast, and I love the fact that you guys are launching this because I think it's a topic that really needs to be discussed a lot more.
Yeah, and I'm super pumped because, well, I think one, you and I go way back, right? And I'm sure you'll kind of mention a little bit in your background, but also we've talked about this for a little bit too in terms of like what's missing in the space from a W2 employee. And when Nick and I started this podcast, literally the first person I was thinking about, like, Nick, we got to get Jose on the podcast. He's crushing it right now in multifamily. He's doing this while working as W2. He's doing this while having a family. So I think a lot of people are going to be able to relate to your story a little bit more. So For the audience, you want to go ahead and walk people through your background?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. So I'm originally from Chicago, went to school at Arizona State, moved back for a year, and realized that I do hate the cold and the humidity. So I found my way to San Diego shortly after that. And honestly, how I got into where I'm at currently is that I started as an insurance adjuster. When I moved to San Diego, I didn't have any other job opportunities. I interviewed, and they offered me a position, and it paid more than the telemarketing job that I had for the temp position. And did that for about 8.5 years. Did everything from liability claims to marketing, catastrophe property claims. And then I actually took a short stint from the industry and worked for Fireball Whiskey. That was a good time, a little bit too much of a good time. And then I went back to the insurance industry because I made a lot more money than I did at Fireball at the time. So, but how I found real estate and multifamily was actually in my transition from a claims adjuster to the contractor side. I now work for a company called Blue Sky Restoration, a commercial restoration company across the country. And the clientele that we have on the West Coast was primarily multifamily and commercial insurance adjusters. And as I was meeting the multifamily investment groups, asset managers, property managers, I was new to that particular niche. I would just ask a lot of questions, and it just clicked for me one day as I was talking to an asset manager, and I asked them like, "All right, so you're telling me at the beginning of the month I could be anywhere in the world, and that check's coming in. So I really just need to oversee and ensure that my operation expenses are efficient, and I can be cash flowing from anywhere in the world, and it's no longer location based." And that was the spark for time freedom for me. And then I went down the rabbit hole searching Google and found Bigger Pockets. And we all know no one's the same after you find Bigger Pockets. So started listening to the podcast. Like, I think I listened to at least 2 podcasts a day on my commute for the W-2. So I just turned my car into a mobile university, so that way I could get over the pain of driving all of Southern California, which you guys know, it could take me from San Diego to LA, maybe 2 hours on a good day, one way, maybe 4 hours one way. So I needed something to occupy my brain and not get road rage all the time.
Oh yeah, I could definitely relate to that traffic, even more for you, Nick, as well too. So I'm sure kind of we share our story. That's how we were able to also leverage our time a little bit better and educate ourselves is during that commute time. And I think that's something that people could take away as well, is how do you maximize that time that you're in a car? Because especially if you're in California, or you're Southern California, you're going to spend a lot of time in traffic.
A lot.
It's funny you mentioned, Jose, that no one's the same after listening to Bigger Pockets, because that's so true. I mean, X and I did something similar. He just gate kept it for me for like a year before he let me in on the dirty little secret of real estate investing. But I think I listened to every Bigger Pockets episode up until July of 2021, and I fit them all in like 18 months. And it was great and super educational. Did you ever feel that it was too much information? Because I found there were so many different strategies. I was like, I can implement them all. In reality, I could only implement one, which was house hacking for me. But did you ever go through that with that much information getting pushed to you at one time?
So it wasn't necessarily the difference in niches, because I was basically talking to people who invested in multifamily daily and weekly. I knew that multifamily was the niche for me. It was more a matter of my analysis paralysis, was because I always felt like I needed to listen to another podcast, listen to another Audible, read another book, watch another webinar. That was really what led to my analysis paralysis, is that I felt I needed just one more piece of information so I can know A to Z, which no one knows the entire process before they get started.
Yep, exactly. And I felt like I was the same way as well too, Jose. I think that's why we were able to relate so well early on, where I felt like I have to have every single piece of the puzzle figured out before I even got started. And eventually, when I ended up getting a mentor and just jumped into it, I found myself figuring things out as I went. And that's how I felt like I was able to scale a little bit quickly and learn quicker by actually doing it versus everything being just all theoretical. No, well, one of the things I was going to ask, Jose, is, you talk about, kind of starting off your W-2, how you got kind of started into the concept of real estate. But I want to rewind real quick, just out of curiosity. What's your educational background? What did you go to school, and does it somewhat relate to what you're doing full time now?
So I went to school for marketing. Business and mass communication is the major that I left Arizona State with, and I went back to Chicago thinking that I was going to work downtown Chicago for like Leo Burnett, Starcom Media Vest, like one of the large media companies, and found that I was had no work experience, and so I just needed to build my work resume and everything. But as far as that's translating into what I do now, it worked a little bit more when I was at Farmers Insurance. I transitioned into their marketing department. I did that for about a year until I learned about the catastrophe claims department. In 2007, they had wildfire in San Diego, and I was helping to coordinate the evacuation sites for that particular event. And as I met the property claims adjusters and the supervisors, they would basically tell me that they would go out to different sites for about 21 days at a time. And I kept asking more questions. I was like, well, how much do you make in that like 21 days? And they told me. I was like, all right, I need to jump ship. I'm going over there real quick. And so fast forward to where I'm at now, I'm actually in a sales role. So it's not quite the same. And it was actually more learned skill set for myself because we've talked about it before where I consider myself an introvert. So for me, when I heard about a sales position, that was probably the last thing that I ever would have considered. But I got so burnt out on insurance claims that I was willing to take on anything at the time. And it worked out though, because the one thing that introverts have a better skill set with than extroverts, I would say, is that we tend to listen a lot better. So for me, honestly, it was just about asking more questions during my sales meetings. And I probably talked the least in every single meeting, which made me feel comfortable because everyone else was talking the entire time. But that helped me build stronger relationships with everyone because I was genuinely interested in their background, how they found their current position, their path, and what they're looking for, and how to grow in either their current career or their investment portfolio.
So Jose, can I walk us through a little bit too, right? So you talked about, finally getting started, listening to bigger podcasts, not being the same afterwards. Like what happened after you discovered Bigger Pockets, after you started educating yourself a little bit more, and what did it take for you to kind of get through that hump of analysis paralysis that you mentioned?
So for myself, when I went down the Bigger Pockets rabbit hole, I found all the books that they had published over the years. And really, I tried going down the path of house hacking in San Diego. As you both know, San Diego's a little pricey. And so also my wife, the girlfriend at the time, we couldn't necessarily get on the same page with house hacking. I saw it as a great opportunity. She didn't quite feel the same way. So from that aspect of it, I decided that my capital go a lot farther out of state. But to invest 2,000 plus miles away, I was very fearful about that. So I purchased David Green's Long Distance Real Estate Investing book, and I purchased the Burr book. I bought pretty much the entire bookstore through Bigger Pockets. But I piecemealed everything together so that I could feel comfortable with doing out-of-state investing and the Burr strategy so that I can do those value-add multifamily properties and get to that infinite cash-on-cash return that everyone's after. And I was going to say, too, to caveat what actually got me out of analysis paralysis was the final push of going to BPCon 2019 in Nashville. I went there solo because I knew that if I went with some buddies, like I would probably just hang out with them because I am that introvert, so I would not push myself to meet other people. So I went solo to that conference, pushed myself to meet as many people as possible, kind of build those relationships. Met David Green. We chatted a little bit. We had some mutual friends that were in multifamily, and he invited me to join his mastermind in 2019. So I joined a week later, the David Green Mastermind, and that's where Xavier and I met. We formed our accountability group, and it was kind of that kick in the pants, as well as the birth of my son in November of 2019. And I was like, all right, I've been talking about this for 2.5 years. I got to make this happen. Just got to make it happen.
So It's funny you say that. I was listening to Jay Scott interview, I believe on the market these last couple of days. And his first line was, I meet 100% of real estate investors. 95% of them have done zero deals because they're in analysis paralysis. They're afraid. They're too scared. And then he goes, and then I meet the other 5% has done 2, 3, 5, 7, 1,000 deals. And he said the reason why, once you do one, it's almost impossible to stick to one because you see that it works. You have your proof of concept. You feel so much more confident and you see the returns and you're like, man, I need to pull the trigger on this 2 or 3 or 5 or 50 more times, depending on your limit, to say that you're feeling more comfortable in that real estate space and you're really starting to earn that income. So I thought that was interesting. You said that you went to a conference without having a deal, which I'm sure felt kind of weird in that first conference. And that was in Nashville, wasn't it?
It was in Nashville, and it definitely felt weird. Even going to the meetups, like the local meetups in San Diego, when I did not have a deal, it was always kind of a gut check for myself because everyone's first questions is, "Oh, what do you invest in? How many doors do you have?" And I didn't have any, and I knew I wanted to invest in multifamily, but you can see like people's responses as you say certain things, and when you don't have any deals, and they have even a couple of properties. Sometimes they just kind of glance over. So meeting other people who really had not purchased their first property also helped me at that Bigger Pockets conference because I knew I was not the only one that was still trying to figure it out.
Yep. And I remember in my case, right, it's when I was closing on my primary residence in Virginia, I made sure the closing was right before BPCon 2019 because I did not want to show up to the conference saying like I didn't have one. But to be honest with you, it's at the end of the day, it's just getting started and kind of being in an environment was truly what was helpful, right? Not saying like, yes, I just acquired my first property. It's like, okay, I closed it, I got keys. I was house hacking and I had a single person in there just yet. However, when I started surrounding myself with those individuals, just having conversations in general, I started to notice too. It's like, hey, it didn't really matter that either I had just closed or I wouldn't have had any properties. Just a level of conversation you're having with certain people, or heck, just by butting in and just listening in on what people are talking about, I was able to get a lot of content and a lot of value out of those conversations.
Well, and it's interesting because 2.5 years later, you're in a position to be, to me, big time. Jose, I'm looking at you. When we were talking at Bigger Pockets conference, I leave. I'm like, shit, I got to get like him. I'm trying to get and grow in this space like he has. And it's so interesting that, that 2.5 years is not a long time when we look at our span of our lives, but it can be so impactful if you take the right level of action. And I actually remember when X was closing on that house and he tried to push up his closing date even more. And I was like, what are you doing? He's like, I got to have it done before the conference, man. I got to have a deal in my pocket. So I'm like, I'm an investor. And I was like, yes, absolutely you do. You can't go to an investing conference without having the deal closed. Like it was in my own head versus now realizing there's so many people to connect with at that conference to give you that support and that confidence to get those deals closed and then start with either your first or third or fifth or wherever you're at that time. The support's there. And that's why I love the community so much.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right, Jose. So you've kind of talked about, you mentioned briefly a little bit about investing out of state. Do you want to kind of share with the audience kind of what does your portfolio look like right now?
Yeah. So when I was evaluating markets to invest out of state, I was between 4 states. I'm from Chicago, so I chose Illinois. My wife is from Iowa, so I chose Iowa. And I knew Kansas City and Missouri, or Kansas and Missouri, because of my time on the Farmers Catastrophe team. So I was there for 3 months straight, and we just drove around everywhere, kind of explored all of the areas. So those were the kind of the 4 states, areas that I was looking at. But Illinois, even though I'm from there and I know the market very well, Illinois always was number 2 on the highest property taxes in the country. And it's not as landlord friendly as I would like. So I kind of crossed that one off the board. And then in 2018, I actually met a property manager while I was working the exhibit booth for my W-2 at the National Apartment Association. And she happened to be in Des Moines, Iowa. And it was a market that I was already looking at, reached out to her. She was nice enough to take all my calls through my analysis paralysis stage, trying to figure out the path of progress, which neighborhoods were the best to invest in, price per unit, everything that I was looking at. So after I joined the David Green Mastermind and X and I had the accountability calls, I ended up making an offer on a 7 unit. I ended up closing on that at the beginning of 2020, right when California shut down, and I was like, all right, we're doing this. This is happening. And the funny part is, though, on the day of closing, I followed up with the broker and I asked him, I was like, hey, I hope I was bugging the crap out of you the entire time, but I just wanted to make sure that I was, on top of everything. He's like, Jose, that was the easiest closing that I had all year because you were constantly following up with me to make sure that you had everything lined up, you had all the documents, you knew what you needed to close on the property. You have no idea how many people will ghost me on the 11th hour and a deal will fall apart that last day. And we started talking about goals, and I told him that I wanted 21 units in 2020. And he just said, great, I got a 15 unit that's off market. I'll let you get your feet wet on the 7 unit, and whenever you're ready, just reach out to me and we can talk about the 15 units to get you to your goal. I called them 2 weeks later, and I got the property under contract on that call and bought that one. So I got to 22 units in about technically 6 months.
Whoa, that's awesome. But dude, I mean, 2020 during a pandemic, going to 22 units, like describe that, because during that time, not a lot of people were, at least when it pertains to like newer investors, a lot of people were pretty reserved and pretty scared for that process of acquiring anything. What do you think? What separated you for those type of investors that were probably a little bit more hesitant and not wanting to buy any type of property during that time in 2020?
So the thing that I think separated me from everyone else who decided not to move forward in 2020 was that I started making offers in October after joining the mastermind in Des Moines, Iowa. So I started making offers in October leading up to that first property in March. And I already knew the different areas in the market that I was looking at. I already knew the right kind of price point that I needed, that everything was trading for at the time. And I was already building those relationships with brokers that I didn't want to lose my momentum with them. So I just kept making offers. And then honestly, I was already under contract the minute that COVID started ramping up. So I was like, well, this is happening regardless, but I just didn't know that it would shut down the day that I closed.
So do you feel like the broker was going to give you that second deal had you not been so on top of it, even as a rookie, calling them back, making sure there was the easiest close possible? If you didn't instill that confidence in the broker by just doing that simple thing where in your mind, you're freaking out because you're like, oh my goodness, I got this deal. I got to make sure I'm on top of everything. And then the broker's thinking, man, this guy's amazing. He's on top of everything. I'm going to get him a second deal when he's ready. Do you think that happens without those conversations?
I think you definitely need to have those conversations in order to build the relationship with the broker. And I'm probably a little too transparent sometimes on my conversations with brokers, lenders, everyone, just because I want to, not like let me think, the best way to put this is that I want to be transparent as possible in every single conversation that I have, because I know that will build the relationship faster than me trying to kind of BS my way through certain conversations. And by letting him know every time that it was something new that I hadn't done before, which was everything at that point. So I kind of preface every call. I was like, hey, I didn't realize that I needed this done. How much longer do I need before I can get you that documentation that you need to move us forward in the due diligence process? So it really comes down to the communication, but I would say that talking about goals on that last call is the reason that I got the 15 unit. If I did not have my crystal clear criteria, as Brandon Turner likes to say, then he probably wouldn't know what I was looking for next and how I was looking to grow my portfolio. And I was trying to do the stack where my goal was 21 units in 2020, 42 units in 21, and then 84 units in this year. I didn't quite follow that path for multiple reasons, but that was the goal at the time. So because I had the next 3 years lined up for that conversation, he knew how to help me.
Yeah, and I like when you mention that, Jose. It's you have to have clear, like, what's your buy box? What does that look like, right? Because if you're not sure what you're looking for, how is a broker supposed to help you out, right? So you're giving them a job at that point in time of trying to figure out, like, okay, they said that they're interested in Southern California, but within Southern California is different kind of markets. The profiles look a lot different. And I know when I engage with brokers talking about from a commercial space, at least, I'm telling them the amount of units that I want to see, right? The amount of doors, kind of more or less like acreage, what I would like to see. And then essentially, what kind of the condition I would like to see the property and in what market. And then from there, they're able to take like, okay, based off these 3 or 4 things that you mentioned, here's some of the things that you'd probably be interested in as well. And I think that goes a long way because they're now able to essentially, if something comes across their desk, they're like, hey, this kind of fits, X's buy box, Jose's buy box. Let me go ahead and send it over to them right now and see what they think. And I think that's how you keep them be able to send you some deals there.
Yeah, 100%.
So Jose, really interesting that you were able to take on so many units so fast. Obviously, building relationships and things like that were super critical. What's the one thing that you would say you did that allowed you to be in position to close on 22 units in 6 months? Because that's quite the tagline and a very impressive stat to share with folks.
So for myself, as I mentioned, I'm in a sales position right now for my W-2. And even while I was in the analysis paralysis stage and I thought I was in that too long trying to get ready for this first property, I was very intentional with scaling my income to save as much as possible. And I looked it up a couple months ago. And in 2017 was the first time that I actually tracked my net worth. And that was actually the same time that I joined Bigger Pockets. But in 2017, I only had a savings of $24,000. But since I'm in a sales position, I can scale my income quickly if I just double down on what I needed to do to actually achieve those results. So in 2017, my savings was $24,000. In 2018, it was $56,000, and in 2019, it was $102,000 in savings. And so that was what really helped me get ready for this first property. But it was also joining the mastermind because while I had over $100,000 in savings, it was just sitting there. It wasn't doing anything. I was losing money to it daily because of inflation. So I just needed a mindset shift to that. It was my need for certainty that was forcing me to just keep it in savings. Whereas me purchasing the property, that first multifamily property, I still have the same amount of money. It's just in a nicer piggy bank than my current bank.
So it's so critical that we double down on that for our listeners. You got to make money, but you got to spend less than you make, and you got to invest the difference. That's huge to be able to increase your savings at that rate, and then use your education, the resources like a mastermind around you to reinvest that back into a better asset. That we cover that topic, avoiding lifestyle creep, because I'm pretty sure it'd be pretty easy to ball out, maybe go on a trip with the wife to Aruba, maybe a little fancy vacation, drop a little 20,000, 30,000, maybe get yourself a nice little Tezzy, little Tesla. But instead you wanted to invest for your future and build for your family, which a lot of people aren't willing to make that delayed gratification sacrifice.
Yeah, the lifestyle creep is huge in preventing a lot of people from moving their financial freedom goals forward. And for my wife and I, we came to an agreement because with our firstborn on the way, our oldest son on the way, she wanted a primary residence. We were actually still renting at the time, but she wanted a primary residence with a small backyard to raise them in so we can run around. And, we had something that we call our own. But I didn't want to move our financial freedom goals back because of a primary residence. So we came to an agreement, and this is kind of how we were able to get, and how I also recommend to get spouses on board with investing, is that I tied my goals with financial freedom to her goals with primary residence. So I told her that the minute that we hit 21 units, that we would start looking for a primary residence. So that was in the agreement. I was like, let's just move our investment goals forward, at least my investment goals forward on that at that time, and then we combined the primary residence. And we closed on the second property in July of 2020, and we started looking for our first primary residence in October of 2020. So I tied her goals to my goals so that we can make it a win-win.
For everyone looking at how to get their spouse on board, that's a great way to do it. It's being able to go for that win-win, but then getting the other person to pour into you because you're pouring into them and what they want, I think is mission critical for relationships in general, friendships, partnership, all that kind of stuff. but especially with your spouse, the person you're going to build this empire with, and then be able to hand off all these units to your kids as well. I know that's really cool. And I think a lot of people can take that hopefully away, and you start to have that conversation with your spouse if they're not on board. So, Jose, we're going to transition a little bit into how has the W-2 really allowed you to invest in this real estate? How does it prepared you? What are the things that your W-2 has allowed you to do in that investing space to take this action?
So a few of the things that we had mentioned really allowed me to get to where I am today. One is that my clients and the people that I am looking to work with for the W-2 for commercial restoration are multifamily investors or insurance claims adjusters that handle multifamily losses. That's kind of the niche that I chose to dive into. And then because I was able to scale my income because it's a sales position and it's not necessarily time-based, so I don't have to necessarily spend 80 hours a week to make more. I can make more as long as I'm more efficient with my processes and procedures and my outreach. I can be more efficient from my desk than I can be driving around all of Southern California. So at a certain point, I was able to build a book of business where I don't necessarily have to be out pounding the pavement as regularly as I was when I first started out. But again, like that first 18 months in a sales position, you're building a book of business, and it's pretty hard. You're knocking doors, you're dropping in, trying to catch people when they typically don't want to see you or hear from you. So for myself, in my current state, because I've been in the position for 6 years. The first 4 years were pretty much me just constantly cold calling, outreach, follow up, because it would typically take that 7th follow-up for me to get my first sale. And that really translated very well with investing because you're typically not going to find your first deal on that first call.
Yep. And I think it kind of sounds like you're kind of tying it back there, Jose, where you mentioned the level of follow-up that you had with the broker. Do you think that kind of came from your W-2 as well and the skills you developed for that job that you worked?
Yeah, I know that I'm not the only person that he's probably trying to close on some deals with. So if I can make his life as easy as possible and get him the documentation he needs, just be on top of it and be in constant communication with him throughout the process, it'll make his life easier and my closing process a lot easier if we're all on the same page and set the right expectations up front.
Nice. There's one thing that I wanted to circle back on with you, Jose, that you mentioned. So you talked about how, your analysis paralysis, that kind of switched over once you went to the Bigger Pockets conference, started taking more action as well too when you were in the David Green Mastermind. What would you say is one of the benefits that you saw overall being part of a mastermind? Because I see some folks sometimes post or talk about how, it may be a scam. You're paying money to like gurus to be a part of this group. Like, what's your take on masterminding? Do you feel like it really helped you accelerate like your investing in your growth?
It has absolutely helped me with the growth and the acceleration of my process. And I heard this actually on another podcast, is that some people may be good with just reading the book, but some people need a little bit more help than reading a book. Like some people may need some additional accountability. So for myself, because I read a ton of books, but I still was not taking action, I needed to join and surround myself with other people that were taking action versus trying to do it all on my own and be solo in this entire mission. While I did start out solo in those first 2 properties and the process of investing in multifamily, I didn't have to be solo in the overall journey. And that's why the first mastermind and our accountability group that we had for 2 years on weekly calls, that probably helped the most because I knew that I wasn't the only one having that struggle. Like you would check me many times like, hey, Jose, you said that you were going to do this on the last call. Did you do it? I was like, no, I didn't do that. So to have someone who can constantly push you to hold yourself accountable, because sometimes the easiest person for us to lie to is ourselves. Like I could say that, hey, I'm going to work out, and then I'll give myself an excuse why I can't work out this morning when I could. but I just gave myself an excuse and a way out. So if I can lie to myself, I typically, like most people, are not comfortable lying to other people. And so for me to tell you something, I knew that on the next call next week, like I had to have that done before the call. Even if I did it like 2 hours before our call, I felt better that I actually did it before the call.
Yeah, I think ultimately, at the end of the day, you're gonna get so much out of something if you're putting in the work for it as well too. If you join a mastermind, right? It doesn't matter the level of mastermind that you're in. If your head's not in it, if you're not committed, if you're not following up with the things you're saying you're gonna do, then why are you even there? Like, why are you spending the money? Why are you being a part of that? Right? Because at the end of the day, like you want to take action, you have to take action. And putting yourself in an environment where you have an accountability group, I think is really what separates a lot of investors. Because to your point, there's a lot of things that I would have to do as well, so that I did not want to look bad in front of the group. I didn't want to say I didn't do anything today, right? Or sometimes it pushed me to think bigger or have bigger goals of like, all right, I can truly probably analyze another 10 more deals this next week. So that's going to be my new goal. Right. And you talk about how people like, I would call you out on something, you have to feel comfortable. Like if someone's not meeting their end of like their goals, sometimes people are too focused on like, hey, I just want to be nice. I don't want to hurt that person's feelings. Well, it's like, hey, you're doing them a disservice, right? So if they're saying they want to hit X amount by this time, if they're not doing it, there's always a nice way of going about it. Like, hey man, you said that this was your goal. Like what's going on, what you're struggling with, what can we help you out with? But it's always good to kind of put it on their radar, because now as an individual, like, oh, okay, everyone is watching and they're following up. So I got to make sure that I'm able to deliver.
Yeah, and just like you said, like you don't have to be a jerk about it. You can actually follow up and like see how you can help them or give them some additional value so that they can actually do it by the next call. And I think the other thing that I wanted to mention on that was that a lot of people only see the cost of joining a mastermind, but they don't actually see like what they could potentially take away from the mastermind. So if I know I'm going to pay monthly, or if I'm going to pay like a big lump sum to join a mastermind, like for example, the Maui mastermind that I went to last year, overall, after everything's said and done, that thing probably cost me 10 grand to do. So you better believe that I was going to be so intentional with my time there, my conversations, everything that I learned, so that I can 10x, 100x that investment, because I'm not just going to shell out 10 grand. So everyone needs to think of what they can gain by being intentional with the investment in themselves.
That Maui Mastermind, that's the Brandon Turner one, right?
That is the Brandon Turner Mastermind.
How did you get into that one, man? That is really cool.
So that's a really great story. So Brandon and I actually connected when I was in Maui in 2019. We did a baby moon, and I'm sure hundreds of people probably reach out to Brandon knowing that they're going to go to Maui and that he lives in Maui. So I brought a journal. It was a 365-day journal for 3 years. It asked a new question every single day, but you could track like where your responses were year 1, year 2, and year 3, so that as it changes, as you grow in the relationship, you can just see how your responses change. So I packed the book and I put it in my suitcase, and then I pulled it out during our trip to Maui. And my wife was like, "What are you doing with that journal?" She's like, that's a new one. And I was like, so I brought it because I want to try and meet up with Brandon at some point and give it to him as a gift. And she's like, "You are such a creeper." And I was like, well, fair enough. Fair enough. I didn't think we were actually going to meet, but I did reach out to him. I took a photo with my wife and the journal, and then he responded, and then we chatted a little bit. We didn't end up meeting up then. But then I started, because I started buying the next year, I started my social media page and started sharing my journal. Then he saw everything, and we built a relationship, and I did some project-based work for him on his social media campaigns. And then when he announced the Maui Mastermind, I applied for it, and I was accepted, and kind of kept growing that relationship from there.
So note to all the listeners, if you want to meet up with Brandon, get him something nice and show up at his front doorstep in Maui.
It's all about the follow-up. All about the
Yeah.
follow up.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's a great point, because in that one way, and that, I think, very small example, you were trying to provide value for Brandon, right? You were trying to help him out. I'm sure you were thinking to yourself, 1,000 people hit him up. Hopefully, I'm the one person that's going to try to make his life a little bit better, his day a little bit better. And then you were able to carry that on into a relationship. I think is super cool. And one of the ways I think is the best way, if you guys are looking to connect with a mentor, is don't just ask them how you add value, because that's annoying, because then I have to figure out, like, how do you help me help you? Like, that's a lot. Come up with something, pay attention to what they're saying on podcasts, what they're saying in their webinars, what they're saying on social media. Look for a small niche or a problem you can solve for them, and then try to connect with them that way. Because that authentic connection is going to go a long way, and it seems to have worked very well for you in this instance with Brandon.
Yeah, and another way that that helped me on my journey with buying that first multifamily property, and another relationship, was that there's a multifamily investor that I joined his mastermind, Andrew Cushman's, after David Green's mastermind. And to build that relationship with them, I had access to CoStar's database. So I knew the area that he was investing in Georgia. So I basically reached out to him. I was like, hey, I got a list of all of the properties that fit your buy box. Do you want me to, where can I send this to you? So I sent it to him. I didn't ask for anything in return, but because I sent that to him and I was just kind of coming from a place of value, we developed a relationship over time.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And one thing that I want to plug in there too, right? It's when you have a conversation with an investor, with a broker, whoever it may be, it's always good to ask the questions like, hey, what are you working on, or what are you looking for? Because they're going to be able to share with you either their struggles or something that they're trying to find, close a gap on in their business. And you may never know that you might be able to help them out with some of those things. I'll give an example, right? There's an individual that I recently connected with about 2 weeks ago, and he's a pretty big player in just regular real estate investing, more on the commercial side now. And he's trying to grow his short-term rental property management side. So for me, it's like, okay, the company that I'm partnering with, we know quite a bit about managing short-term rentals. So it's one of those things where we can easily go in, help that guy out. And then in return, like, honestly, I didn't ask him for anything. I just wanted a little bit of his time, get to know him a little bit more, learn about his investments. And then from there, if things take off, great. If they don't, that's all right. Because at the end of the day, you're able to help out one more person in your journey. All right. And one last plug that I will make from a mastermind perspective when we talk about cost, right? It's very easy to look at, like you said, Jose, what's the monthly cost of a mastermind? I would not look at it that way. I would look at to see what kind of opportunities are you going to get with that mastermind, right? So the money that I spent being on David Green Mastermind, being on other masterminds, I can tell you that I've made it back at least double, triple the amount, either based off the things that I learned or the things that I learned and also applied it within my processes or how I acquire properties. So I would say to the listeners out there, don't just think about the price tag per month. Think about the knowledge that you're going to get out of it, the network that you're going to get out of it, because you never know. If you're looking for someone to fund your deal, looking for 50 grand, you might be in the network right there that someone's going to be like, hey, I got 50 grand right now. Go for it. Okay, was that $300 a month now worth it for you to be part of the mastermind? Probably so. All right. Well, Jose, we're going to go ahead and jump into our standard questions that we ask all our guests. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it off here. How has your W-2 allowed you to go after your financial goals?
It really helped me to understand that everyone is in sales. I mean, my toddler and baby and wife sell me every single day. So you kind of need to understand that everyone is in sales. Everyone's trying to get the restaurant that they want to go to for dinner. They're trying to figure out how to get that career advancement or whatever they're looking for. Like, everyone is in sales. So for myself, it just helped me realize that I can translate these skills very easily to investing, because the brokers are looking to sell deals. That's how they get paid. The lenders are looking to find people to lend money to. That's how they get paid. Property managers are looking to find investors to manage their property. Everyone is trying to sell their services. So a lot of people may have the fear that they're not bringing value when in reality, the minute that you have a deal, like there are so many people that want your business. You just need to go in with that mindset that you are a commodity. You're the hot girl on the bar. So you just need to kind of take that. And I would say that that was one of the biggest takeaways from my W-2.
Oh, you got us cracking up now, Jose. I've not often felt that way. I'm sure all of our significant others have felt that way in the bar, but that is a great way to describe it. And just you reach out to somebody, you'd be amazed at what people are willing to do to try to make things work for you. I mean, I went after a really big project, an Airbnb house hack recently, and I had one lender tell me, he's like, no way you're going to fund this deal. And I was like, okay, yeah, I believed him. And then 2 months later, I called a different lender about a different deal that was even bigger. And he goes, oh yeah, we can make this work. And I was like, oh, I just had to ask the right person. That's crazy. So Jose, one thing we do like to do is we do like to try to look back and see what we can do to help, younger investors and investors just kind of starting out on their journey. What's one piece of action you would do differently if you were kind of to restart your W-2 career?
If I was going to restart my W-2 career, what I would do differently is not look so much to jumping around to getting like an additional 10% raise from another company here, another 5% here. I would figure out how I can best optimize where I currently am while still getting paid well. And so that way I can use that extra time to invest. So the plus with my properties is that they're in the Midwest and I'm in California. So they're 2 hours ahead. So I just can wake up earlier. I can make calls from 6 to 8 my time in California and get a lot done before I even start my W-2. So that's something that is, if you can leverage your time better instead of chasing after an additional 5%, 10%, you're going to make a lot more money on the real estate side than you will on your W-2 side.
So we actually do something similar. We time block. So X and I both work on different portions of the business before we start our W-2s. Then we W-2 it up. And then when we get home, we time block it out to make sure we're doing the same thing. So I love that you said that because I think that's huge. Because your W-2, I mean, a 10% increase in your W-2 is nice. I'm not going to say no to that. I don't think anybody will. But if you're able to invest in a property and you're able to throw in 50 grand and get a 10% return cash on cash year over year, that's going to turn into a lot more than that 10 grand you could potentially receive in that 1 year's bonus. And often you get more tax breaks than you would do in that W-2 if you're investing it appropriately.
Yep.
All right, Jose, what's one piece of action a listener can take after listening to this podcast?
I would say the best action you can take is to make a list of all of the brokers that you have seen with deals in the last 2 months. If you have not called any of those brokers that you've seen deals from, call the brokers. Even if those properties have sold already, go to the associate on that brokerage. So we're talking about multifamily 5+ units. So it's a little different than on the residential side. But on the commercial brokerage side, you're going to have a first vice president, managing director. There's like 20 different names for some of the people in brokerages. But the person on the bottom of the list, the associate or the person that is just getting started, reach out to that person, especially if you're getting started. That's what I did. I chose the associate instead of the first vice president to call because I knew they had only been with the brokerage for maybe a year at that time. So they're more willing to work with me. They're hungrier to make a name for themselves on the commercial side than the first vice president that's probably handling that 200, 300 unit property. The associate and senior associate is probably going to be the one that's handling the 5 units, the 10 units, the 20 units. So build those relationships with everyone that's getting started on the commercial brokerage side, but you have to make the calls to actually have those conversations. So my action tip is to make some calls.
So just to make sure,
I
make
actually
the
wrote
call.
down.
I think that's what I said.
No, I was going to say, wait,
actually
just
wrote
make
down.
sure. Oh, Jesus.
There's a lag.
It was a lag. No,
You go, X.
Yeah, marking it. All right, I'll go. So, Jose, just to make sure, call the broker. Can I just email that person? Is it easier if I just send them an email? Like, is that the same thing?
So from the introverted response, I would say yes, you can send the email. From the actual results response, I would say call the broker. You can send an email today to the broker, and then tomorrow call them because they already saw your name.
That's great advice. I'm writing down all of this because I'm not in the commercial real estate space, but eventually I see myself getting more and more into it as I want to get more passive as time goes on, you know?
Passive is the goal.
Yep. All right, Jose, last question. This is my favorite one. They're crazy would you rather questions I get to come up with. So my question to you today, it's a horrible one. All right. Would you rather have a fly that zooms around your head exactly 1 foot in distance from your head? If you kill it, another one spawns. So it's always there for the rest of your life. Or every time you sneeze, you get a 1/4 inch paper cut randomly somewhere on your body. This is terrible. There's no good answer.
You were not kidding that this is a super random question. So I'm going to say the paper cut. The paper cut is going to be more painful, but I would say that I sneeze a lot less. But if I'm trying to make first impressions with someone, to have a fly that flies around my head every single time, I don't know how many people I would attract in my life with flies constantly being around me. Like, people are going to say stuff. I'm going to have more negative self-talk about myself. So I'm going to take a paper cut every single time.
Can you imagine you're doing like a syndication deal and you're talking with investors in a presentation and there's just this massive fly? Yeah, that's a good pick. I think the paper cuts are excruciating, but the fly for the rest of your life, I mean, we got 40, 50 good years of living to do with flies flying around us. That sounds terrible. Oh, man.
Great question, Nick. Cool, man. So, hey, Jose, I know we're kind of getting towards the tail end of this interview, but if guests want to find a little bit more about you, where can they reach you?
So you can find me everywhere on social media, Claims to Fire. So claims adjuster, plural, to fire. Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, pretty much everywhere. And if you are interested in learning more about multifamily, I did actually launch a mastermind called the Value Tribe with Terrence Doyle. So fun fact is that the first 2 properties I talked about earlier, I bought both of those properties from Terrence back in 2020 before I knew who he was. And then I saw him on the Tribe of Multifamily Mentors, the Bigger Pockets YouTube channel. And I just kept reaching out to him afterwards. We actually ended up in Andrew Cushman's multifamily mastermind at the same time, ended up in the same pod. So oddly enough, like, I think it was just meant to happen that we built this relationship. And so we had our first call on Monday, October 10th. And our goal is to help everyone in their multifamily journey. And I just think to myself, back to the Maui Mastermind, we wrote out our vivid vision. And I wrote that I wanted to help create 100 millionaires through multifamily. And at first I thought it was through some of the pivots that I'm making in our investment strategy. But when I started having those conversations with Terrence last year and the beginning of this year, I realized that a mastermind was the best way that I can serve the Jose from 5 years ago that was stuck in analysis paralysis and help him get over that hump so that he can buy his first multifamily property.
Man, we're going to clip that. We're going to blow that up. That is amazing advice. If you could figure out how to help yourself in the past, you're going to be able to help so many investors, so many people better their life through that strategy. That's amazing. I'm taking that. I might have to get that tattooed on the wrist or something to be able to remind myself of that forever. That's amazing.
Just make sure that you don't get a tattoo where you're going to be having your paper cuts.
Yeah, that's true. That would be painful.
Well, Jose, we had a blast having you on the on our podcast today. Thank you for making the time, join us, walking you through your journey. Definitely really pumped for you. Definitely, it's been great for me personally to see your growth over the past 3 years and kind of where you're at now. And I know our bond and our relationship is going to continue to grow, and hopefully someday we'll have a chance to work together in this kind of space. But thank you again for joining us.
No, I greatly appreciate the opportunity, gentlemen. I am excited to see the W2 Amigos blow up, and happy to do anything I can to add value to you guys and your audience.
All right, guys, that was our interview with Jose Linares. So as you heard, he's crushing it right now. And there's definitely a couple of things that I think our audience can take away from his podcast. The biggest thing that I took away from it, and I think would be really important for you guys as well, is the importance of having a clear buy box and also the importance of follow up, right? So he talks about the importance of also knowing what it is that you're looking for when you're looking for a property, right? What does that criteria look like? That way you can communicate it to your broker, to your agent, so that they're aware of how to be able to help you. And then also, if you haven't had a chance to follow up with that broker or with that agent, definitely worth following up, have a conversation with them, just so you know, like, hey, I'm here, I care. And even though we haven't done anything recently, just kind of stay on like their list and on their radar. What about you, Nick?
Man, I think the big thing that our listeners can take away is the scalability of income. So Jose did a phenomenal job kind of leveling up at his W-2 by being an excellent employee. But then he didn't just increase his lifestyle and start balling out of control, him and his wife taking all these fantastic trips. And they actually aligned their goals to put their personal residence on hold and then get to 21 units so that they could have a much stronger investment portfolio down the road. So I'd say scaling your income, making sure you're saving it, living below your means, and getting your partner on board through a win-win scenario, pour into them so they can pour into you and your goals, I think is extremely important. That every listener should be doing if they're going to get into the space.
Sweet.
All right, guys. That is the W2 Amigos podcast. We would like you guys to please leave us an honest rating and review if you can on wherever you get your podcasts from, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google. We're on everything. So again, it's the W2 Amigos, guys. Give us a follow. Give us an honest rating and review. We'd really appreciate the support so we can get out and connect with more amazing guests like Jose. For us, too, if you want to give us a follow on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, we are on all those channels as the W2 Amigos. And if you'd like to get a hold of me, I am on Instagram at The Five Family and also TikTok. And then X, where can the guests find more about you?
Yep, I'm on Instagram and TikTok at XavierMarin_. That's where you guys can find me.
All right, guys, thanks for listening. We look forward to seeing you again.